I mean, talk about getting kicked when you're down. It was just so frustrating and I guess depressing. Like, what more can you do for people? And they just don't understand it. And if I ever do this again, I'm doing it for myself. I'm tired of making other people money and rich.
What is up, everybody? And welcome back to the Schooling Struggle Podcast. It is our belief that the only guarantee in life is that we are all going to struggle, and how we choose to embrace our struggles is what empowers us to become the best versions of ourselves. How is it going? My name is Pete, coming to you from Heartland, Vermont. And with me, back again, is my friend, Mr. Brian Fortier. I'm super pumped to have conversation number 2 with Brian tonight. Good morning, Brian. Let me try that again. Good evening, Brian. How's it going?
Good evening. Glad to be here.
I just wished him a good morning, but it is 8 p.m. But that's where my brain is right now. I'm super, super grateful for your willingness to come back on the podcast. After Brian came on a couple episodes ago, we got some really, really great positive feedback about what he shared and how he shared. And I said, Brian, I'd love for you to come back on multiple times if possible. And there's often times when last minute Todd's circumstances don't allow him to come on. And basically, the way Todd and I have this set up is Todd prioritizes his family, and when his grandkids come to the house, he's unable to record. 1, because he wants to give them attention, and 2, because they're so loud that it's difficult for him to record in a quiet space. So sometimes he'll text me last minute and be like, I can't go tonight. And I just reached out to Brian. I said, hey, Brian, if that ever happens, would you be willing to step in and join us or join me? And he's like, oh, Pete, I'd absolutely love to do that. So in classic Brian fashion, literally the next day I get a text that's a document with, I couldn't even tell you how many topics that Brian thought would be worthwhile to discuss on the podcast. So I said, yeah, pick one of those topics and let's go. So I knew that Ty wouldn't be able to come in this week. And I was, Brian, I would love to dig in on one of those topics that you shared. So let's make that happen. Before we do that, just want to check in with you, Brian, see how life's going, what's going on. And I really appreciate your fire, your tenacity, and your excitement in the last episode. It lit a little bit of a fire underneath me to making it happen through the summer months here.
Well, thanks, Pete. That's humbling to hear. I really appreciate you sharing that. Sometimes I don't feel like I'm being energetic enough, so that's nice to hear.
If you have not yet listened to that episode in 96 titled, They Can't Make Me Unhappy, and you're chiming into this one first, Brian talks quite a bit about his background, his age, what he's up to, how many kids he has, all that background information that goes into preparing the listeners for what the guest is going to be sharing. So if you want a little more information on Brian, I'd suggest you go back, listen to episode 96, and then you can jump ahead and listen to this one. During that conversation, Brian shared some incredible insights that really inspired me and motivated me to want to bring him back onto the show. Tonight, Brian, I would love to dig into a little bit about what we call BYOS, which is bring your own struggle. And if you wouldn't mind touching upon a time in your life when you were faced with a challenge or had to overcome some struggle, I think that would be awesome. And then from there, just kind of wherever the conversation goes, I think is a really, really cool thing. Like we'll just kind of let it flow naturally. Don't have too much set of a format, and we'll just let it ride from there. So it's nice to have you on.
Thanks, Pete. I'm looking forward to another episode. Get a lot of good feedback from people that listen to it. They're good, close friends of mine. So thanks for making me look so good, I guess.
When Todd and I first started this, I'd be so fired up about what's happening. And, 100 episodes in, things change. There's other challenges and other things. And it's really nice to be reignited and refueled every now and again. And you definitely did that for me. So I'm super grateful for that. And I'm excited to not only have you back on tonight, but for other episodes in the future.
Yeah, I look forward to it. I wish I knew what I did to boost you up. Just being me, but I guess I'll just keep being me.
Let's dig in.
Yeah, I wanted to share tonight a little bit about, struggles. Struggles do make you stronger, and everybody goes through them. I mentioned last time, reading books, and I was never a very good reader in high school. I mean, the teachers wanted us to read books, but where they weren't of interest to me, I just wouldn't do it. I was a very big into sports. My parents had us doing a lot of sports when we were younger to keep us out of trouble. And an Oakland Raider fan with the NFL. For those of you who are familiar with that, I know you're a Rams guy.
I'm sorry to hear that for you. I
Especially the last couple
send
decades.
you my condolences as a Raider fan.
When I was a kid, the guy John Madden was their coach when they were in Oakland. Well, the younger listeners will know from the Madden the football game, but
Yeah.
this is the original guy when he was a coach, long before a broadcaster and all of that. But he'd written a book that I saw called "One Knee Equals 2 Feet." That's a rule in football. You can look it up. If one knee hits down in bounds, it's the same as having 2 feet, so you're not out of bounds. It's a catch. But in there, he talked about an incident between a player with their team and a player of the Patriots in a preseason game. This player for the Raiders named Jack Tatum hit a receiver coming across the middle, Daryl Stingley, and paralyzed him. He became a quadriplegic. And so, reading that story in that book, I'd never heard of that. I ended up buying both of their books. Jack Tatum's, his nickname in football was Assassin, and his book was titled "They Call Me Assassin." But in Daryl Stingley's book was titled "Happy to Be Alive." And in reading that book, there was a poem in there that I'd never heard before, and it's an unknown author. And back it up a little bit, when we were kids in high school and whatnot, my parents wouldn't let us quit a sport if we started it. You didn't have to play the next season, but you couldn't quit that season. And that became a big deal for us, was not quitting. And in that book, Daryl Stingley, there was this poem, like I said, called "Don't Quit." And that hung in my locker, in my regular locker, in my gym locker, football locker, because, man, there were days, man, I wanted to quit. And there were some days that were pretty low and really struggling. And I'll probably share that with you before we get off the podcast here if you remind me. But that came up at a very good time for me because it sort of became a motto of mine through my life. It actually hangs on a wall right in front of me here right now. So it's a daily reminder to me to not quit, to keep persevering through no matter what the struggles are. Upon graduating high school, I went to college where you did, Western New England College. But unlike you, I didn't graduate. I made it 1 year. That's where went to work at a laboratory. It was a place my father was working in Manchester, New Hampshire. Long story short, this woman was pregnant. They needed someone to come in and be trained to enter data into a computer. So I did that. She ended up having the baby that night. So I had 1 day of training. And I worked in that position until she came back. And then they cross-trained me in the laboratory where I became a technician. And I was always very into chemistry and biology and all of that. Just the classroom was not my forte to learn those things. And when we were working, it started to get towards the winter, and I could see business was slowing down. And I remember saying to some people there, boy, they're going to start laying people off here. There's not enough business. No, they've never laid anybody off. Well, sure enough, they did. And I was one of the newer people. But the president of the company came to me and said, geez, Brian, the sales manager really likes your personality. He's wondering if you'd like to try a position in sales. And I'd never been in sales before and had no desire to be. But
what kind was it? A water laboratory?
it was just drinking water, yeah.
Just drinking water.
But they were nationwide. And I'll get into what some of the clients were and markets they did, which were similar to what I did when I had my lab, sort of where I learned the background of the trade. And I thought, well, rather than go find a new job, I would do that. And you had a very low salary, but a really good commission plan if you worked it. And they gave you different markets. So like one person would have well drillers, another person had bottled water companies. Well, they gave me the real estate market, which back then was going through the savings and loan crash, similar to what we went through in 2008, but that was bigger with the banks.
Was this in the 80s?
Yeah, late 80s, late 80s, yep. And I remember people laughing, saying, oh, that industry's dead, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, I'm going to get them. I'm going to make so many calls, and they're going to think this market's turned around. So as it got to be like 4 or 5 o'clock and everyone else was leaving, I started to call west through the time zone where people were still open for business.
Oh, nice.
And you do that 5 days a week. And my father and I were commuting for that first year from Heartland to Manchester, New Hampshire. So we had a lot of time in the car to talk.
It's about an hour and a half for all you non-Heartland to Manchester commuters.
We made a fun time of it, though. It was some good stories to go and memories that we still laugh and talk about to this day. But a long story short, the realtors, I did really well. Sure enough, real estate must be turning around, I heard them saying. So then they gave me home inspectors and mortgage companies and banks, all the people that sort of did work with that industry. And then for some reason, they gave me the beverage industry, like sodas and beer and things like that. And I ended up getting an account with Pepsi-Cola where we ended up testing every bottling plant across the country and then eventually around the world. And in about a year and a half's time, I was now making more money than the president of the company.
So it's just based on your commissions and your sales is what you were making your money off.
Yeah.
And were you so you would go in and test the water that they were putting in the product, or just the water that was in the facility?
We would send them kits with instructions, and they would draw the samples, and they would be FedExed back to us. And not only were they doing every plant, they were doing it quarterly, and they were doing it before and after filtration. And I learned later what they were doing was to set up to bottle water at every Pepsi bottling plant they have. So I don't know if they
Oh,
have
yeah, it's a
Dasani or
decent sized
Aquafina.
business. Yeah,
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 because
yeah.
those weren't around yet. That's what they were
Oh,
doing.
that's interesting.
Yeah, of course I have none of that money to show today because I had more money than brains. I had a great car, some
Yeah.
great clothes,
Yeah.
and then they got bought out, and they came to me one day and basically said something to the effect of, "We're going to take away the uncertainty of your commission." And I didn't know what that meant, but that meant I was going straight salary, not only no commission, no bonus, and I just sat there like, Why am I going to work that hard anymore?"
Where's the incentive?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, my father had left and gone to another lab down in Massachusetts that did more than just water. They did soil, wastewater, a whole bunch of stuff. And he said, "If there's something here, I'll bring you down." And so I bid my time. And so, sure enough, I went down there eventually. And I told him, "Listen, I'm going to come here. I'm going to work just as hard as I did before, but I'm going to set myself up financially that if they do the same thing here that they did back there, I'm walking away." I was demoralized. Like, I did everything I could for this company. And so off we went. Now I could test like the actual soda product and the beverage of it. They would have a problem with their beverage and send it up. It's like, yeah, there's an extra oil in your root beer because
Huh.
customers were complaining there was like a slick on their root beer, and,
Yeah.
and root beer is a lot of oils, so there was an extra one in there. We could find out what it was. It was just then with that one I traveled a lot more around New England and into the Midwest a little bit. I had worked out a deal where I had bartered for free ski passes at Mount Wachusett down in Massachusetts for their water testing for myself and all the executives in the company, and then the same at a really nice health center nearby where I was going. So that worked out well for me. I didn't have to pay for a ski pass or my health club membership, and nor did any of the other people if they were to use it. And I taught one of the owner's daughters how to ski. She was 3. The first kid I'd ever taught, her name is Emily. Part of the reason my daughter's name is Emily.
Hmm.
She's named after her grandmother and this other little girl. And 3 years later, that ended the same way. And I tried everything to save it and not to have it fall apart. And this time I left before my father because I wasn't going to let him, run me down again. But man, I remember going home, falling face down on my bed, and just bawling. Like,
Because they
what
cut
more?
you loose.
Yeah, what could I have done? I'd done everything. I taught
second corporation in a row cut you loose after
yeah,
you
I
give
taught
everything you
I
had.
taught the president's daughter how to ski. I'd done all these things for the company to make everyone's lives better, and it didn't. In the end, it didn't matter. It came down to greed and envy, and of course, it left me with a bad taste. And I left that first lab, and I was like, okay, was that a fluke, or can we do it again, or can it be done again? And so we did it again, and then I took a job at a third lab up here in Vermont because I wanted to get back up here. I met my kid's mom. I knew she was who I was probably going to marry, and she was from the area and wanted to be here to raise a family, and came up here and did it again a third time with another lab with the same end result. And talk about getting kicked when you're down. And it was just so frustrating and I guess depressing. Like, what more can you do for people? And they just don't understand it. And it was put best to me one time is that you're a business person working with chemists, and they don't talk like you. They don't think
Yeah.
like you. And that was a big thing for me. And I remember at the first lab, it was my father saying, because I was talking to my boss about something, and our thinking was so off kilter. And he said, "Well, Brian, you got to understand something," because he was my father's age, this guy. He goes, "Well, Brian, you got to understand something." He goes, "And you're going to struggle this with the rest of your life." And he goes, "Maturity has nothing to do with age." And man, that was
Yeah,
that.
I teach high school. I know about that.
Yeah, but you'll see some high schoolers that are so mature.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's amazing. Even in elementary school, back in subbing here, It was tough, but yeah, you go through those ups and downs, and you give them your blood and your tears, and in the end, that's how it all goes for you. But that's sort of how I got into the lab business, and uh, at the time, I told my wife, I said, that my days are numbered here. They're setting me up at the lab up here in Vermont, and because I could see it months in advance. First time, shame on you. Second time, shame on me. Well, this is the third time,
Yeah.
and I said, just so you know, I said that's it. I said, well, when this ends at this lab, I said I'm done. If I ever do this again, I'm doing it for myself. I'm tired of making other people money and rich. And she got really nervous. She goes, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "I don't know." I said, "I learned I like people. I don't need to make as much money. I got better with not wasting all that money I was making." And word for word, I said, "I think I'm going to go be a waiter at Louie Louie's in West Lebanon." And I was there full time for several years, and and part time for it was over 20 years. I was there. There are some people that don't even last 2 days, let alone
Right.
a year. But
And then at some point during that time, you opened up your own lab, and you
yeah,
were, as we talked about in the past episode you were on, you simultaneously were working at the restaurant in the evenings and then running your own lab out
yeah,
of Heartland, Vermont during the day.
yeah. It was 2 years before I started that. My younger brother actually wanted to start a lab because he knew we'd made money with that, and so I said sure, and so we started that. It was in the fall, October, November, but I could tell by like April or May he wasn't going to last. He wasn't going to stick through it because it takes a lot of commitment, a lot of work on a persistent basis. Um, that was if you've ever heard, there's the 3 R's that it takes to keep an employee happy: reward, respect, and recognition.
Hmm.
Ever heard that? Really,
No.
only one of them has to cost you money. Respect and recognition don't cost you any money, but that reward usually requires money in most of it. But when I started my own business, I said, okay, you know what it takes to keep an employee happy. Well, what about when you own a business? What keeps you focused? What keeps you happy, or whatever? And I came up with the 3 Ps, and I feel you might be able to relate with this too. Is pride, passion, and persistence are the 3 Ps you need if you're going to own or run a business. It's a struggle and a challenge every day. And when that brother was getting out of that business, the things he did, and that went on. Oh boy, it was not a. You talk about a struggle, business and family wise now, because now it's family involved, and it gets tricky. But
That's interesting. I'm reading a book right now called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And when I told my buddy Doug I was reading that book, he's like, "Put that book down." He's like, "Don't read it." He's like, the practical advice in there is junk." He's like, "The mindset of it is good, but don't take the practical advice." The guy who wrote that book got really lucky. So I thought that was kind of a really cool, kind of controversial response. But there's a lot of interesting things in that book. But he talks about how our education system is set up to basically to make people employees.
yeah,
Like you go to school to learn a skill. You can be a very high paid employee. You could be a doctor. You could be a lawyer, but it doesn't really teach you how to create your own business or how to invest and how to take your money and use it as a servant to make you more money. Right.
yeah,
Like, so he just talks about these different things. And he was saying that the people who are incredibly wealthy in the United States, they're not the intelligent, they're the bold. And it's
yeah,
those bold people that are incredibly persistent. They lack, it's not fear, but they have so much belief in themselves that they're not worried about what other people think or what their shortcomings are. Like they believe they don't have shortcomings and they'll push through. And that's kind of what I'm hearing you say is like a couple months into this thing, you have to be crazy persistent. You have to believe in yourself and you have to be bold and know that, yeah, maybe the financial reward isn't there yet, but you got to keep, the
yeah.
analogy that you use, you're the duck on the surface. You got to keep paddling hard underneath.
But yeah,
And when I asked you what you want to talk about tonight, you're like, "Oh, I'd like to talk about the struggle." And I think I'm just really blown away by the fact that you had all these kind of simultaneous things going on, these challenges. You were raising family with multiple kids. You were working nights at the restaurant. You were managing and running your own company. And as I'm reading this book, Rich Dad Poor Dad, basically the premise of the book is, what are the wealthy or the rich people doing that the middle class and the poor are not? It's a fascinating read, whether you agree with it or not, whether you're going to take the practical advice and apply it to your life or not. I just think this guy's perspective is really interesting. And basically the premise of the book is that this guy's dad makes a lot of money, but he lives paycheck to paycheck. But his friend's dad didn't go to school, didn't graduate, started his own corporation, and then that led to multiple corporations. And it's the guy who didn't go to school teaching the life lessons about how to be wealthy. And it's a pretty fascinating read. But as you're talking about this right now, I'm just kind of thinking about your brother's like, I don't know if this is for me. And I'm just kind of bouncing these ideas in my head of what I'm reading right now. This book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Oh, I've read that book and others that he's written. So yeah, it goes deeper than that book, that's for sure.
Yeah.
That's yeah. There was one of his books I read on investing, and I remember reading it, and I was like sharing it with my wife at the time, saying, "Boy, I really want you to read this book when I'm done, because if you don't, you're going to be very frustrated with the way you see me investing some of the money from the business now." Because what this guy was telling me, and I knew it was true because how it was written. Because yeah, it's you see all this money coming in, but you have to reinvest it in your business, and it's not income. It's it's totally deductible. It's and I remember going to see when we were still married, going to see my wife's brother down in Florida, and he had a payroll company. And he and I had a conversation years ago about business, and I said, John, I said, if you can learn to apply the right principles, you can succeed selling roofing nails. It doesn't matter what you're doing; it's the principles, and you have to apply them. Like I said before, persistently, passionately. um,
Yeah.
it relies on that. And anyways, we got there and we went into his office, and all of these Rich Dad Poor Dad books by Robert Kiyosaki were lined up on his desk.
Yeah.
And I just pointed at him to my wife and said, "That's not just me."
Yeah.
When you, because yeah, you do. Yeah, see, I never thought of it as being bold. I just thought I had to do it. I'm going to fail. It's either succeed or fail. And yeah, to some people that's very bold. And I processed this the other day that I forget who I shared it with. I think it was my good friend Jack that I grew up with. I said, "Do you realize?" I said, "I have never had a job that's been just straight salary. It's always been commission or compensation or bonus, initiative to make you grow." And he goes, "And I'm the total opposite." And it's and I think most people are that way, and I don't think either way is bad or better than the other. They're just different. And
Yeah, that resonates with me quite a bit because so my dad was in business. He was a stockbroker, and he came home the majority of the days feeling like he didn't hit his own measure that he had for himself. That he came up short somewhere. Either he came up short with his client, or he came up short in this investment, and he's always beating himself up. And he'd come home and be like, "Oh, I didn't have a good day at work. Didn't have a good day at work." I did go to school. I majored in business, and I thought at some point in my life I'd get into business, and kind of one thing led to another. I became a vagabond, lived out of the back of my truck, and traveled the world for 5 years. And when I was done with that, I realized even in my nights serving tables, I look back and be like, oh, if I'd given this table a little bit more of this or a little bit more of that, they probably would have given me a bigger tip. I would have made more money. And I noticed I was beating myself up after serving for a night the same way when my father was beating himself up about a day on the stock market. And I realized, like, I don't know that that's going to lead to fulfillment and happiness for me, because I saw my dad, more often than not happy or not fulfilled with his day at work. And so I decided I need a job that is a straight salary, because if I'm constantly competing with myself, I'm going to burn myself out.
yeah,
And it was one of the many reasons why I thought teaching would be good for me, because the salary is just there and I can't come home and beat the crap out of myself because I didn't make enough money or I could have made more. Now, a lot of conversations I've been having with my wife lately is I've been doing, quite a bit of investing and learning, and, how can I have my money make more money? And she's like, when is enough enough? And it's not that we have all this money. It's not like that but she's like, but at what point are you like, okay, and you don't want to try to go for that next thing? But I think that's partly how I'm wired, and I got to keep that in check. Like a great example, Brian, is after your last episode 96, you're like, hey, how are the numbers? How are the analytics? So I'd go on
yeah,
and look and be like, oh, we had this many listeners, and this is average, and your release 24 hours is above average, and these things. And I said, but I really don't want to get caught up in the analytics, because once I do, I'm going to take the fun right out of it for myself.
you
And I
don't
think
want to do
it's
that.
I think it's really admirable for someone who can chase that and kind of climb that ladder, but also keep it in check, because I can't. I mean, that's anything. That's any kind of competition. I overdo and hurt myself. Like, any kind of challenge I get in, I'll just take it too far. So I'm like, I need a job that has a straight salary so that I'm not doing that every day. And I don't know how you balance that.
Well, Todd asked something about that in the last episode. Now that you bring it up, about well, how do you not go too far? When we talked about helping enough people get what they want, he mentioned something like that, and it is that balance. It's finding that balance where you're happy. It's not taking too much time away from you and your family. It's when you just need to be where you are when you're there. You know, what I mean, you can't
Yeah.
be
Be where your feet are
exactly.
is the saying. And I struggle with that big time.
There was it's funny you mentioned something earlier. I wrote this down. One thing was don't take things personal because what people say about you is a reflection of them, not you. And that's a thing. I forget what you were saying back a few minutes ago, but don't take things personal. That's a hard thing not to do. It took me a long time to get to that position, but when I did, it really, really put my life in a sense of peace. Really at peace where I am and with people. And yeah, my life's not perfect. That's for darn sure. And we get into that maybe for a future episode. But, like I said, struggles are everywhere, and it's how do you persist through them and not quit because life's like that book said, how to raise positive kids in a negative world. It can be a negative world. And you like to think it's all roses and everybody wants to be happy, but I'm very fascinated. You mentioned that book, Rich Dad Poor Dad. That was, I don't know if you saw me smile when you said it, but
Yeah.
I was,
Yeah. I mean, it's been on my list for a while. I bought it. Actually bought it for a student. I was like, before I give it to the student, I'm going to read it.
yep.
And I was reading it, and then I texted Doug, who's finances is one of his passions. He's like, don't read that book. He's like, the practical advice in there is junk. And then he kind of backed it up with some of the things that happened with the author. And I said, yeah, I mean, whatever perspective you have, I already have my investment strategy. I would be shocked if one book changed it. I'm a buy and hold kind of guy. I'm not trying to beat the market. I'm just trying to be in it. So for those of the listeners out there who are not teachers, the way the school year starts is about a week before students come to school. Teachers go in for about 5 days and do what's called in-service. And that's a bunch of different teacher-related tasks, meetings, and endeavors, preparations for the school year. And what's happening now, I'm realizing, which is crazy, is I've been in the game long enough where my former students are now coming in as first-time teachers. They're coming out of college and they're starting their career as a teacher. And I'm finding that the two best pieces of advice I can give to any new teacher or anyone that's in the teaching profession is exactly what you said. Don't take it personal. Like any way that a student treats me is not a reflection of me. It's a reflection of their life experience up to that point, to that interaction that we're having. And then the second one is just remember that it's a job. Like it's not life and death. And you're doing an incredibly admirable, noble, really hard thing. And parents are going to come at you and community members are going to come at you and all these things are happening. But if you don't take it personal and you just remember, like, at the end of the day, it's just a job. Like you can stay in the game long enough to really have a positive impact on the people you're working with.
Yeah. And you don't know where it will end up taking you. They're doing some renovation at the dealership, and there's this electrician company. They're doing work, and there's a young woman that went to Heartland and went to the tech center at Hartford. There's an electrician there, and it's just so awesome seeing those people, and it's out there and doing their thing. And how are you? And they're asking about my kids, and
yeah, it's super cool. I brought my truck in to get inspected today. I'm sitting in the waiting room, and the back door of the thing opens, and a current student of mine, pokes his head through the door. He goes, "Yo, Mr. D, that is your truck." He goes, "I thought that was your truck." He goes, "Hey, you want to see my race car?" I'm like, "Yeah." So it turns out he works at the place, and he spent, I don't know what his bosses thought. He literally spent the next half hour showing me every square inch of the engine of this race car that he races at the local racetrack on Saturdays and Sundays. And I don't know anything. Like if it's under the hood, I know nothing about it. And he was just so psyched to share with me. And then my family and I went to a store later today, and the girl working the cash register was one of my students. And she's like, "Oh, Mr. D, it's great to see you." And it's just like, it's really, really cool to see, kind of, once you've been in the game long enough and you haven't quit, how to see it kind of pay off in ways that you didn't expect. And then I put a bunch of stuff on the listserv today, which is like the town email to like get rid of stuff for free or sell stuff or buy stuff. And all of LJ's like old, like potty training stuff and all that we're selling. And the people that reach out, she's like, "Hey, Mr. D, how's it going? I just had a kid." Like my former students who are now in like their mid 20s and late 20s are having kids. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, wow, it's so crazy. So I don't know. You just never know. And I think if you really, really work hard and treat people well, like that stuff comes back to help you later on in your life. If you have a response to that, I'd love to hear it, but I have a question for you.
Sure.
So when you think about your struggle and you're in that time in your life when you were kind of giving everything you had to the job and then getting let go, and then giving everything you had to the job and then let go, and then for the third time giving everything you had to the job and then let go. When you think about navigating that and like how you manage that mentally, like what do you attribute that to? I know you talked about the don't quit thing, but like I'm gonna ask you to go kind of like answer that question, not with, well, I was just persistent, I didn't quit, but like, what were some of the mental tactics you used to be like, all right, this just happened, now I got to do this?
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely a time where I wasn't sure what was going to happen next. I had family and friends, and then at the time I was reading all those other books and things to sort of lean on. Had a lot of positive reinforcement from areas where I hope other people do, because I don't know how I would have gotten through it without some of those people and those things in my life. I mentioned that guy Zig Ziglar in those books. I mean, he never knew me personally as a friend or anything. Having that in my head and knowing that there's got to be a better way, Brian, you're doing the right things. I know that the third time, I just sort of smiled and laughed as like, and I said when I left that business, I'm like, the only thing I'm upset with them is I left them with enough business for the next 3 to 5 years, and within that time period, they sold to another lab. So it was, and because I tried. Sometimes you can't save people from themselves. That second lab in Massachusetts I left, it was years later. I think we just had Jake and Emily. Um, I got a call from the guy who was the president of that company, who was that little girl Emily's father, and said, "Geez, Brian, I know how things ended years ago. Wasn't on the best of terms, but Emily to this day still talks about you, and we were wondering if you would come down for her sweet 16th birthday."
Wow.
And man, it was I did. It was the right thing to do, even though the way things ended. Um, I wish God there was a saying I used to have. Well, I think I said it in the last one: "A person of integrity expects to be believed, but when they're not, they let time prove them right." And that for me it proved me right. I did the right things. Yeah, it didn't end the way I wanted to, but in the end, the right won out.
Yeah,
Lack of,
if you take the high road,
yeah,
and for that duration, it's pretty rough,
yeah.
and then people start to see it through toward the end.
But in that third lab, it was eating a lot of crow because I knew, I was a guy that, and I was driving a Mercedes. I was, shirt and tie every day kind of a thing. Doing big deals with all around the state in New England with that lab. And it's like, okay, Brian, you're going to go be a waiter at Louis Louis. You're going to see these people walk in and you're wearing a T-shirt that says the name of the place. You got to be ready to handle that. And sure enough, it happened. And I just ate it and kept going and kept my head up. And I think those people had as much respect for that as anything.
What was the reason in making the pivot from the corporate world to why did you choose serving tables and bartending? What was it about that? Did you have past experience in that when you were younger, or did you know the owner of the restaurant? Like, what was the reason why you chose that specific restaurant, that specific position of all changes you could have made?
I'd never worked in a restaurant before. I enjoyed eating there. I knew no one there. Matter of fact, when I went in and applied for the job, this guy who I'm still friends with now gave me the um, application, and I interviewed with Eric, one of the owners. And so we talked, and I said, "Well, okay." He said, "Well, we'll reach out to you about the job." I said, "Okay, if I don't hear from you in a week, should I call back?" He goes, "Yeah, if you don't hear back in a week, give us a call back." So I called back, and they said, "Oh yeah, you're supposed to start next Tuesday. Normally you come in at 10:30, but come in at 10." I was like, "Oh, okay, I'll be there." So I went
Glad I
in.
called.
Yeah. Well, it gets better. Wait. I started waiting tables, and I've been out done training, and it's been about 2 weeks. And the manager came up to me and he goes, "Oh, so Brian, how's it going?" I said, "Pretty good." I said, "It's still pretty hectic." I said, "I've never done this before." I said, "But I can see that when the day's going to come that I'm not even going to need to think how to do this job." I said, "Then the challenge is going to be," I told him, "how do I make it fun every day?" And so that was, again, around like October, November. And then that January, they started an employee of the month thing. And now Louis Louis had only been around 3 years at that point. And so the first month, this guy downstairs who did a lot of the cleaning and the dishes during the day. He got the employee of the month, certainly deserved it, Oscar. And second month, this guy Chris got it in the kitchen, and then the third month I got it. So it was the first person from the front of the house to get it. Now you got to understand, there were people who'd been there since this place had opened that were waiting tables and bartending, and they were not happy that I got it, and not one of them did. And I was up cashing out one day in the office, and the general manager goes, "Oh, congratulations, Brian, on getting the employee of the month." I said, "Oh," I said, "thanks." And he goes, "Yeah, and to think you weren't even the person we hired." And I said, "Excuse me?" He goes, "Yeah, we weren't going to hire you. When you called back, we thought you were the person we were going to hire. We said when you showed up and the other guy never did, we decided to keep you."
No way.
And I said, "I'm the best mistake you ever made." And then I was there for 20 years.
Oh, that's wild.
Yeah.
That's wild. Yeah.
But you just never know. I mean, I've shared that story with my own children. Why you follow up, why you and don't let things just slip away, because you never know like they weren't going to hire me.
So my first day of serving tables story, I had never served tables before either. And long story short, I ended up moving down to Richmond, Virginia, and there was this really fancy fondue restaurant close to where I live called the Melting Pot, and they're pretty popular down south. There aren't very many in the Northeast. I think there's a couple. And it's an expensive restaurant. It seemed that people really only go there for like special occasions. So it was like birthday, graduations. Like it was a pretty pricey place to go. And I was like, well, if I'm going to serve tables, like I'm going to go right to this. So it was a very, very long training process. You had to pass a couple tests in order to be on the floor serving on your own. So I finally get to the point where I'm like, it's my first shift and I'm not serving on my own yet. I'm shadowing one of the other waitresses. And they said, "Yep, you're going to be shadowing." I'm not even going to say her name. I'm sure she'll never listen to this podcast, but just to be safe.
Yeah.
And I go in there and so I'm waiting around and she comes in. I think she had a pretty bad day leading up to her night shift there. And I just start kind of like, I go in and I'm awkward and I don't say anything. I just start kind of following her around. And after like a minute, she looks at me, she goes, "What are you doing? Why are you following me?" I go, "Oh, the manager told me that I'm shadowing you tonight." She's like, "You're shadowing me? They never told me about this. Stay right here." And she storms into the manager's office and like starts screaming at him. So he kind of comes out with his head between his legs. He's like, "Yeah, we're going to switch you to shadow somebody else. You're going to shadow that girl over there." I was like, "Oh, cool." And so that girl was like, "Yeah, that's great." So this girl that really was not excited to have me shadowing her. And I never use this word. Like I truly never use this word. But if I were to ever like use the definition of the word bitch, like this was the closest that I'd ever experienced. And I decided I'm going to annihilate this girl with kindness for as long as I work here.
Kill him with kindness.
Oh my gosh. And I took it like, I'm kind of a jerk, but I took it as a challenge. It wasn't a fake, ungenuine kindness, but I was like, I'm going to be genuinely kind to this girl and just see what happens. And after a couple months, like she totally came around and she ended up thinking of the world of me, and we had a friendship and everything. It was really cool. But I was like, that was a really kind of turning point in my life. Like no matter how crusty or hard shelled the outer side of somebody can be, that there is an inner. And if you just are persistent with kindness, like it'll pay off. And then the other thing that I learned from serving tables, and I ended up serving tables for a decade before I got into teaching. Like you, I won a series of awards and all these different things while I was serving. I have never had a sip of alcohol in my life, and I was a top wine seller at that at that place, because it was like, oh, whoever sells the most bottles of wine tonight is going to get 2 tickets to Six Flags. I was like, oh, I'm selling wine tonight. I want to go to Six Flags. So those things happen. But what I learned about serving tables was you wake up in the morning and you have to work today. And every waking hour, you have to work today. Whereas like a day job, you finish work and you're like, oh, I don't have to work till tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And you have the rest of the night to chill out. When you wake up tomorrow, you go to work. When you serve tables, you wake up and you're working today. You're never working tomorrow unless it's your day off.
Yeah.
And that was really hard. Like I'd spend the day like, oh, I got to work tonight. And I realized no matter how upset, pissed off, or negative or angry I am that I have to go to work, I have to go to work. So I may as well enjoy it. And that was a huge shift for me because I was a pretty negative person. And I was like, yep, like I'm just going to embrace this and treat it like it's awesome because I've decided to be here. Like, yeah, I can quit and go do something else, but I'm not going to. And that was when that's the first time I can remember like really starting to build mental strength. Like, yep, you can be pissed off that you have to go to work today and you just woke up and you're not going to work for 8 hours. So you have 8 hours to do what you want during the day. But that entire time knowing you have to go to work, that kind of sucks. You got to figure out a new mindset so it doesn't suck.
Yeah.
So those two things, like be relentlessly kind and own your mindset, were two huge lessons that I learned amongst many other things while my decade of serving tables.
Yeah, I was asked one time when I was coming in for beginning of a shift, I was bartending, but I always stop in to the server's evening meeting because I wanted to see if I could make their vibe a little happier if it wasn't so positive. And the manager one day at the meeting goes, "Brian, you always seem to come in here in a good attitude, good mood. How do you do it?" And to this day, I've shared it with people I work with now and back at the brewery. I said, "Well, I'll tell you that my only secret is that when I get out of my car, I leave myself in the car with my problems, because they'll be there when I get back. I'm here for my customers. If I can take care of them, they're going to take care of me." And it's maybe it's oversimplifying it, but
what a microcosm for life,
yeah,
right? Like for all relationships.
it's walking out, going in substitute teaching. It's showing up, going to ump a ref a game. It's you're here for this. Just give it your best and have fun with it.
Yeah.
Like life's just too short.
Yeah, it's super cool.
But yeah, I tried to show my kids that years ago was if you can learn to live off of the income you can make, either working at a restaurant or something where you're getting tips or like that gratuity, you can do that anywhere. You can go anywhere in the country and do that job and be able to live like that. Um, and then if you do get a job with a salary, you know how to manage your money, because it doesn't come in the same amount every day when you're working in that kind of industry. Even in, what I'm doing now with Toyota, it's not the same check every week, but you have to have a budget, you have to have an amount, and anything above that, okay, what am I going to do with that now? It's almost like an extra source of income if you have more than what you manage.
So in wrapping up our conversation about
45 minutes.
BYOS, bring your own struggle. Time goes by so fast. Is there any finishing thoughts or anything that you think is worth the listeners hearing as we get ready to close out and sign off?
Yeah, I guess I would just like to read that poem I was telling you about. It's called "Don't Quit." You can look it up online, but these words ring so true. They have for more decades than I care to admit. But it's when things go wrong, as they sometimes will, when the road you're trudging seems all uphill, when the funds are low and the debts are high, and you want to smile but you have to sigh. When care is pressing you down a bit, rest if you must, but don't you quit. Life is queer with its twists and turns, as every one of us sometimes learns, and many a failure turns about when he might have won had he stuck it out. Don't give up though the pace seems slow, he might succeed with another blow. Often the goal is nearer than it seems to a faint and faltering man. Often the struggler has given up when he might have captured the victor's cup, and he learned too late when the night slipped down how close he was to the golden crown. Success is failure turned inside out, the silver tint to the clouds of doubt, and you never can tell how close you are. It may be near when it seems afar. So stick to the fight when you're hardest hit. It's when things seem worse that you must not quit.
It's fantastic. I love that.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
It's awesome.
I don't share that with too many people, though.
Yeah. Well, you just shared it with a whole lot.
Well, I hope they appreciate it. These are the things that keep in my head, that keep me going. People used to look at me like that woman. How come you always seem to be having a good time? It's in my head, and people try to steal your happiness or that from you because they want it, but they can't take that from you because it's in you. And once something's in you, like a book you read or whatever, they can't take it away.
That's a very similar themed finish to your last episode when
Was
you
it?
finished by saying, "Yeah, they can't make me unhappy." That's
Yes.
awesome. That's awesome. Cool. Well, to our family listeners, we so very much appreciate your ears. We thank you for your time. We are incredibly grateful for your attention. On behalf of Brian Fortier, the School and Struggle podcast is out.
Thanks, Pete. See you guys.
Cool.